All right. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about value proposition and how to effectively convey that to your clients to justify whatever commission you guys decide to set for yourself. Obviously, in today's day and age, with everything going on with the NAR settlements and consumers being on notice and attent to all these changes, it's important to be able to, articulate your net worth and what sets you apart from the competition and what you do differently. Um, you know, it, it's a good time to start maybe even role playing some of these conversations. You got to get comfortable with talking to your clients and consumers about commissions and why they're structured the way they are today. Um, I just was at a ski banquet for the race team up at Round Top last Friday, and inevitably the conversation came up amongst some friends. And even one very uh, I'm trying to put this politely, but somewhat hard-headed in certain regards, and just doesn't understand why a realtor has to be involved in a transaction. He said, most instances, you got a ready, willing, and able buyer and a seller. They both want the same thing. It's pretty simple and easy. I said, of course, yeah, it always appears that way. Even sometimes when you have a conventional offer, no contingencies, no inspections, and then you have a walkthrough and determine that the pool isn't in the status that it was disclosed in the seller's property disclosure, it becomes very complicated quick. And, I asked him how he would handle that one. And of course, obviously, he had no answers for earnest money deposit or how that transaction would move forward. And it was very easy to make my point after that, why, realtors provide a huge level of service in a complicated financial transaction that likely is going to be the biggest financial transaction in a consumer's lifetime. So when you're able to prove those points, those conversations become easier. I just also had two conversations last week with the sellers that have properties that I'm going to be listing in the next couple weeks, and both of them brought up the headlines. And I explained to them that commissions are structured by design, and obviously, it was done so to make homeownership affordable and obtainable to the masses. So with them facing potentially another 2.5%, 2%, 3% fee on their side, you have a lot of buyers out there that have a good source of income coming in each month, but may not have the supply in their bank account to go through with another added expense like that. But that's the reason, these commission structures were you know, invented way back in the day. So it makes it more affordable and obtainable to the masses. As part of having these conversations, our office here tried to put together, our value proposition flyer. I'm sure we're going to get into that here, but that's something that you can easily put into your pre-listing marketing package or your buyer presentation package, and it thoroughly spells out, all the different services, activities, and your involvement over the course of the transaction that most people, are otherwise unaware of. So it's a good starting point for those conversations in justifying your net worth. Uncle Tim, you want to explain the flyer and, add your thoughts?
Before we go into that, there's a couple things I'd like to talk about with this. Number one, is anybody currently having these same discussions that Brooks just talked about? If you could let us know and tell us about it. I'd like to hear any discussions you might have had with clients at this point in time. So speak up if you can and let me know. Has anybody had any issues where they've gone into the multi-list to look for a property to show, and they've now seen a 0% buyer's agent commission? Okay, Shelley, anybody else besides Shelley? Speak up, because I can't tell on the screen if there's anybody else.
I did, Tim. Actually, Shelley was helping me with it, so it might be the same one we're talking about.
Okay, so if you guys could tell me, what did you do at that point with your buyer when you came upon a listing that somebody offered 0% to the buyer's agent?
Well, the first thing I did was send the agent an email and asked him and told him that we would like to have a 2.5% buyer agent compensation. And he said, he come back and said, the seller will decide that depending on what offer it was. And so then I think Jim took over from then. So I don't know what happened with it.
Well, I ended up writing an offer on that one, and he said that, the seller, depending on the offer, would be, he said the buyer's agent's commission would be negotiable. But unfortunately, we never got that far, but he said that the seller was willing to be reasonable about it.
Okay. All right. Well, both of you, thank you for bringing that up to me at this point. So let me ask you a question. When you sat down with this buyer, I'm assuming you have them under agency at this point in time?
Yes.
Okay. And did you specifically explain the buyer's agent's contract to them, that when you get into this type of situation, they could be responsible for the commission?
Yes.
And what did they say?
Well, this guy's a little tough. He didn't want to pay the broker's fee. He said we could talk about it on a case-by-case basis, but again, we haven't gotten anything under contract yet, so that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. So you're still working through this at this point in time?
No,
Other
that
than
one's a dead deal, Tim, unfortunately.
But
Yeah.
if they go out and buy the next house, do they understand that if we run into another seller that's not willing to pay the commission, that they're going to have to pay a negotiated fee to you?
He understands whether or not he'll do it. This may be a guy I don't want to work with again. He's been a very difficult person. Yeah.
That's fine. But
yeah.
Again, somebody now has already run into this situation. Okay. So what we have to do before we start talking about the flyer is we have to make sure from the beginning, that we are sitting down and getting the consumer notice signed. We're getting an agency form signed. And let's say hypothetically that their range is up to $300,000. Okay. We need to get a buyer's cost sheet done for them, showing them what their expenses would be if we have to charge them the fee, if we're not able to collect it as a seller's concession or as a buyer's agent's fee. So it's important. This is why the purpose of this call is to explain how important this is. I know, Kong, I think you sent me an email or a text the other day of a screenshot of an agent who wasn't offering a fee to a buyer's agent on a fairly expensive house. Was it $400,000 or $500,000? 600,000, and they're offering zero compensation. So again, if you're going to take your buyer, our buyer, because they're with our company now, you have to make sure you've explained this process. This is how important this is, that we need to be ahead of the curve, that we need to counsel our people with the understanding that they might have to pay the fee. Now, obviously, if they pay the fee, if we're not in a competitive market, maybe that fee is based on the sale price with a 3% or 2.5% seller concession to cover that fee. If it's not, they're going to have to pay the fee. We have to understand this is the new normal, okay? And if we are ahead of the curve, we will handle it better. and we will have more closings, but it's going to be a challenge and it's going to be difficult working with buyers. That's why we have been pushing for the last 6 months to a year as to how important it is to try to find listings, to make those calls, to write those notes, to talk to your database of people and focus on trying to get listings, because buyer sales are going to be even more challenging than ever before. So obviously this marketing piece that we've sent out multiple times now to you has had been floating around the internet and has been floating around Facebook and all this type of thing. And I sent it out to you generically twice. I've sent it out to you on letterhead once, and I've sent it out to you on a Word version that you could change and adapt it by putting your own logos and your own things on it. Brooks has done a nice job. He restructured it and did it with more the new logos and that type of thing. And maybe Brooks can send you that version in a Word document too, that if you wanted to personalize it and amend it, that you could do that. It might make it a little bit easier. I'm not sure, Brooks, if you did that in Word or Publisher or what.
I did it in Canva, but you know, we can make it editable. And also if you have certain ideas that you want us to do for you on your behalf and help you make it branded to yourself, you know, we can certainly help you with that as well. If you send us your logos and that sort of jazz, we can certainly, you know, custom tailor it to you.
And when we get into these situations where we're discussions with people that why do they need a buyer's agent, I can tell you 2 instances last week that Kong and I have been dealing with buyer's agents who were trying to get their buyers out of the transaction. Okay, how would they do that without us? What forms are the contracts going to be written on if they don't have somebody representing them? You know, who's going to hold the deposit? Do they know any of these things? Do they know how the system works? No, they don't. This is a very complex business. I guarantee you, anybody that's done a deal in the last 60 days, it's not exactly easy to get these things to the settlement table. They're a challenge. We have to work hard. And part of this document that Brooks and I have sent out to you is basically 90 different points that as a buyer's agent, things that you do, and as a seller's agent, things that you do. 90 different ones for each side of the transaction. I know Bob Hubler, I can't see my list here, but is Bob Hubler on the call? Okay. Bob Hubler sent me a list of a couple other things that he would amend his to do. So my point is that you need to read through this list. You need to make it editable. We can try to make the document editable to you, and then you can personalize it and you can add and subtract the things that you want to do and not want to do. You don't have to do the things that we have in this document. You can pick and choose the ones that you want to. So maybe instead of 90 different things, you have, 75 different things that you might do in a transaction. And I assure you, if you take that document, let's just say that you're using the buyer's presentation. Okay, Brooks has it set up into 3 different things. The agent's value proposition, showing all the fees and expenses that an agent has to go through just to have a license and just be in the business. Then we have all the different fees or all the different procedures and things that we do to get a listing through and on the market and sold, and all the different 90 steps that you do. And then we have it for the buyer's agent. And that's honestly the most important part right now, is the problems that we're going to have with having these buyers understand the new process, the new deal. Unfortunately, it's not good for buyers. It is not good, because if we get into a market where things aren't selling for the asking price or over, we're going to have situations where buyers then might need closing cost help. And then it's going to be a challenge for them to get closing cost help and pay you if there's no fee being offered. So again, that's why it's vitally important right up front to make sure you're sitting down somewhere. Don't do this. The worst thing you could do is to not explain the consumer notice and the buyer agency notice. The second worst thing you could do would be to do it by a Zoom call, okay, like we're trying to do right now. But at least that's better than nothing, okay? The best thing you could do is go to their house, go to their apartment, have them come to the office, meet you in a conference room, meet you in a restaurant, meet somewhere and sit down and go through this stuff and have them understand it. And make sure you're getting at least two versions when you're meeting with your lenders to get them figures of buying a $300,000 house, which shows the closing costs needed if the seller's offering compensation and the closing costs needed if they don't. And, you know, Jim, if in your situation where they were saying with an acceptable offer, well, what does that mean? Does that mean at full price they're willing to pay 2.5%? Or does that mean at full price they're only willing to pay 1.5%? And are you willing to work for 1.5%? And is the buyer willing to pay the difference of the 1% of what you have in their agency agreement versus what the seller's offering? And have you explain that to the buyer? This is why we're going to continue on these meetings of how to handle these different situations, because these different situations are going to continue to come up. You know, there's been rumors floating around for the last week to 10 days that maybe this settlement's not even going to take place in July, that the courts aren't going to accept it. So we have no idea which direction it's going to go. But at our company, First Advantage, we need to have you trained, practice, role play. You know, if people want to start a role play group about how to handle these things, and you're not able to come to the office, we can do that weekly. If you say, hey, I want to be part of it, let's practice, let's see how we can handle this objection, you know, on role play, then we'll set up a time. Maybe it'll be after this meeting, you know, on Tuesdays. Maybe it'll be an hour before our call on Tuesdays. But I need to know what you need to be successful. And I know that what we're trying to do is to make our agents the most skilled in handling these objections, so that when you get into the gunfight, meaning you're in the heat of battle, trying to get a contract signed, trying to get an agency form signed, that you know how to handle this without looking like a deer in headlights, like, I don't know how to answer that question. We don't want to be that. We want to not overreact. We want to respond with objection handlers. Anybody have any questions on that at this point? Dad, anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, the first thing I want to say to this is, remember, this dance has really not officially changed for the good, as you said. You must remind the listing agent, when you're the buyer's agent, that not 3 weeks ago or right before this change, all pricing for all houses assumed and included that the buyer's fee would be paid by the seller. Now that the seller, and this has changed, and these agents are now taking the position that you don't want to be involved at all with paying the fee to the buyer. They've got to understand that, is the pricing going to be adjusted? There should be adjusting the price. If there, you know, you want to talk 3%, there should be adjustment of 3%. You don't want to attack anybody, but you want them to understand that not only is ball game changed for the buyer side, where they have to come up with the money, but the seller isn't entitled to the pricing he was entitled to before. And a good listing agent is going to be talking about that when they're listing property. And also, so, you know, there's many things to be taken into consideration here as you're enumerating, Tim, on this Zoom. We just need to think differently, and getting together and masterminding this stuff is the best idea to solve it. There's no question about it.
Kong, with that listing, was that just something you noticed in the MLS, or was it a property you were going to show, or somebody was going to show?
It was just something I noticed because I peruse that thing like every day, 2 to 3 times a day, and just noticed that it was there. And if I was to show that property, I'd have to call that agent and find out what was going on, and then second talk to the buyer and see if they're willing to uphold the buyer agency that they signed. So
And I don't remember who it was, and we certainly don't want to say who it was on this show, on this mastermind meeting, but it was a longtime agent, wasn't it? A skilled agent.
Yes,
that
it was.
listed that property. And, it would be interesting maybe to have a conversation with them. And then next week we talk back about how did that happen? Why did they decide to do that? Just try to find out what they went through on that listing, because this was a new listing, right? So, and did they price it accordingly, like my father was talking about? It just might be interesting to have a conversation and see what they had and how they handled it, because that's how, if we mastermind together or with others, that we can figure out how to solve some of these issues that are going to come up.
And Kong, didn't he, I shouldn't have said he, but they end up changing the commission on it like a few days down the road, altered it, and then offered a buyer agency commission.
yes.
Was it a full one commission, or did they discount it, or
It was,
Remember.
I think that
Not full,
2% maybe.
yeah? Okay, so it was a negotiated commission that then the seller was finally willing to pay. Because this is going to be a challenge. Brooks has said it often over the last several weeks that not all these buyers are going to have the money to make, that extra payment towards this process, and it's definitely going to hurt buyers.
I have a question then whenever.
Yeah, go ahead, Morgan.
So on the listing side, I've been signing my listing contracts pretty far in advance now. And on the listing side for any listings that we have coming, June, July, so is the contract going to be changing where it has the commission listed in the listing contract and we're just not putting it in the MLS? Or is it going to change that we should be talking to our sellers about, offering up sellers help, and then the buyer can use that towards their cost or whatever? So like, that's kind of on the listing side, what should we be looking towards?
That's a good question. And what I would respond to is, right now, business is normal, because we can't advise sellers as to what might be in July until we know what it is going to be. So I would just do business as normal. If July 15th comes about and the PAR says to us, okay, guys, everybody's going to have to change their contracts or their listing agreements, and we're not going to be able to offer buyer agency commissions or buyer commissions anymore, at that point we'll have to deal with it. But there's no way we can deal with it now, because we don't know how it's going to be dealt with by PAR. Now, we're getting on a call tomorrow morning with Hank Lerner and Jim Goldsmith and the Board of Realtors to continue the dialogue and discussions of what might be, but nobody knows what it is going to be. So my answer right now would be business as usual, and we'll have to deal with it when we know how it's going to be dealt with by PAR and Bright MLS. Brooks, any response on that, or do you agree with that?
No, 100%. Business as normal right now, until we hear solidified, approved, court-approved changes. And then at which point we'll shift and adjust to those changes.
Okay.
My only suggestion, Morgan, and you probably do this already, but as long as you get the contract signed, have a estimated cost sheet for the seller, and they sign that as well with the listing contract, if they're happy with what they're getting or netting, that should be pretty much all you need at this point.
And if it doesn't sell by July, we might just have to go back to them,
Yeah.
Morgan, and say to them, hey, we're no longer allowed to put buyer's agent's commission here. It might need to be under seller concessions. We can have that conversation when we know how PAR is going to instruct us.
Right.
To handle.
I mean, I have a listing. I was with the girl last night, and none of my sellers, I have a decent amount of listing contracts signed coming up, and none of them have had any pushback with any of this, but I just know that that one's the one that's on the cusp because she's right on the line of 2 years of living in the home, so we have to wait for closing. And so that one's going to fall into being after that time frame. So that's the only reason I was like wondering if there's anything else.
I mean,
Like,
I have
Cost
lots
sheet
of,
all the same with it. I did her cost sheet with it all in there. I have the listing contract ready to go with everything the way it is, but I just didn't know if we should be looking at that. I mean, I plan to talk to my sellers that if we have to do that, that we're gonna offer sellers help. But you know,
I mean, there's all kinds of questions and unknowns that we just don't have any clue on how to deal with it. For instance, like in my head, what's going around is, okay, so what happens now if buyers don't want to pay their buyer's agents? Okay. How are they going to make offers? Are they going to go to an attorney and have an attorney generate an offer? And are they going to then have that offer presented to the listing agent? You know, now all of a sudden, are we going to get all these contracts that we're not used to working with from different attorneys? Are we going to have to understand each and every different attorney's contract? I mean, is our E&O insurance going to cover us if we're not using a PAR form? If these attorneys start presenting contracts, these are the questions that are going through my mind. Are these buyers willing to go straight to the listing agent and be unrepresented? Or are they going to put us in a dual agency situation where now it's like shooting ourselves in the head trying to represent both people? I mean, there are so many questions out there that these attorneys have created more of a mess than I think they even can realize what they've done by changing the way business has been done. Our state of Pennsylvania has been doing full disclosure of the buyer's agencies and the seller's agencies for years. I think we've done it right. I understand that there's a lot of states that have not done it right, but I can think of all the problems we could have, honestly, if every different buyer went to a different attorney and there's no standardized form that we even understand. And I assure you this, if you start getting those things, you need to come to Brooks Kong or myself or my dad up front, because we need to review it and see what the language is in it, because that could happen as these people decide not, they'll be happy to pay $600 an hour to an attorney, but they won't pay us 2 or 3% or 1% or whatever it is that you want to work for. So these are some of the messes that can happen as a result of this lawsuit. Anybody want to add to that? Okay. Anybody have any questions, or has anybody taken the time to review the handout that we gave you and sent you? And does it look something of interest to you that you feel you would be able to use that on a presentation? Does anybody want to respond to what Brooks and I have been sending out to you? Jim, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I don't know if you saw it, Tim, I sent you something that I had from a couple years ago. A lot of the same stuff you had, maybe a few slightly different ideas. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it.
I did. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Came from Rebecca Foote.
Yeah. All these things are good. And we're not saying to anybody, you have to use this. If you're comfortable using the form that you sent me the other day, then use it. It's because this is your value proposition. When somebody starts questioning how much you're worth in what they're willing to pay you as a buyer's agent or what they're willing to pay you as a seller's agent, all we're trying to say is, because of the changes that we're going to go through, we've got to be willing to pull this out of our briefcase. Look, if you go on an appointment and it's somebody you've done business with 3 times in the past and they're comfortable with you, you're not going to have a single question. But my dad and I, when we used to go on our listing appointments with Mike Ferry, we would have these tools in our toolbox. And if you needed them, you had the ability to pull them out and then present them. And that's what I'm saying is custom design these handouts to what fits your style and your business to show your value proposition. So that when and if the questions come up, you know how to handle it, and you can say, I can do this. I mean, Dad, we used to go to Mike Ferry, and people were trying to discount services. The Mike Ferry agents were saying, okay, well, here's the things that I do. You know, why don't we start checking off the ones that you don't want me to do? Because if you don't want to pay X% commission, then are we going to remove this item and we're going to remove this one? Because not all agents do everything that I do to get a home sold. This is what I do to get it sold. So if I'm doing virtual tours and drones and everything else, and XYZ realtor's not doing that, and you want to pay less, then, I mean, do you want me to check that one off the box? So you have to decide how you're going to handle these objections and what things you're willing to do and what things you're not willing to do. In this 90 some handout of our value propositions, there's certain things on there that I probably wouldn't do, and I don't even know what they are on this handout. You know, that's why I'm saying if we make it editable, you can edit it to whatever it is you're willing to do. But good question. Anybody else have anything, Kong, anything else you want to bring up? Brooks, anything else you'd like to add to it?
No, we have a group that role plays here at the office every Tuesday and Thursday, right around 8:30, and I'm sure they'd be more than happy to jump in and have these conversations with you and role play, whether it's a prospective buyer or seller. You guys can do that and get comfortable with handling the objections and talking about commissions and, you know, the whole 9 yards.
And that's done live in the conference room. And we do have the ability to zoom in on that. So if you're not able to come to the office and you would like to be part of that role play group, it's certainly something we can zoom you into and send out a link for you to log on and be part of it. Dad, any final comments before we wrap it up for today?
Yeah, no, the other thing is in every instance here, it's got to be when you're talking to your client, this is the way that I work, and here's how we're going to proceed. And when you give them this pathway, it makes your life a lot easier, because in that you can talk about many things. You know, you can talk about money up front as a buyer's agent running around showing them houses. If you want to, you're certainly legal to do that at this point. So it depends on, as you put it, your value proposition to that client. And the harder you sell your value proposition, the more happy buyers you're going to have when you're working with.
Thank you. Again, just final wrap up for me would be just please make sure you're doing the process properly, which means you're going over the consumer notice and you're going over the buyer agency and you're showing them the fees and you keep a record of it in your file so that there's no problems as you get closer to making an offer. Everybody understands the updated process of working with a buyer.